Greetings, I'm Demonac. I thought I'd choose something other than D&D to ramble on about today. When I was growing up, I was fascinated with the Games Workshop company. Now, I'm sure many North American and world viewers are unfamiliar with Games Workshop and Citadel Miniatures. If you haven't heard of them, they developed HeroQuest alongside Milton Bradley. HeroQuest was awesome. It was a great gateway into both the world of pen and paper role-playing and the style of miniature wargaming that Games Workshop usually does. They're a company from the United Kingdom with several major game lines, including the popular Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000 army-based miniatures wargames, and a billion spin-offs. Each game is kind of expensive, usually has over a dozen supplements in book form, and yet they make their real money from selling hundreds of different miniatures for each game. Citadel products have a lot of character, but I would say there are two main defining characteristics of their games. First, nearly every game places a great importance on building your own custom army. You choose one of the many colorful factions in each game, groups like humans, elves, orcs, the forces of chaos, or their sci-fi equivalents. You get a bunch of points to spend on different characters, infantry squads, artillery vehicles, or other stuff, and possibly custom equipment, magic items, spells, etc., which you will use to do battle against another player. There will be a bunch of rules put in a convenient table which limit the structure of your army, so that your army can't be all cavalry, or all artillery, or all hero characters. Because if they didn't have the infantry quotas, the best armies would be nothing but characters and vortex grenades. The focus on customization is mostly there to encourage people to buy, paint, and expand their expensive collections of pewter minis. But it really sucks in people like me who love semi-min-maxing, but also trying to find unique combinations and ways of doing things. The other thing that is most striking about all Citadel Miniatures games is they are immensely friggin' random. So random it boggles the mind. Expect random rolls to hit, to beat the target's toughness, to see how much damage you do, also who goes first, where your big explosive ordnance lands if you missed, the weather conditions during your battle, and a whole other layer of double or triple randomness for the magic or psionic system, which will have a tremendous effect over the course of the game. And that's not counting the various units, especially specialty orc and goblin units, which have extra super random abilities that backfire spectacularly about a third of the time. Space orcs in particular are famous for the brilliant invention of a rocket with a ball and chain attached. So you fire this rocket, and it yanks the chain, which goes flying up, lands somewhere, and is so heavy and separated from the thrust, the rocket kind of spins around before it kicks in again and launches it off in another random direction. Landing, it always hits it hits like 3 times, and crazy devastation was wreaked across the battlefield with no thought for whether it's hitting the enemy or your own guys. And although I tend to instinctively dislike the degree of chaos involved, like the just utterly unpredictable aspect of a lot of this stuff, you have to admit that Games Workshop games, and their company in general, have a way of keeping everything light and fun, even though their settings are usually the most brutal, depressing crapsack worlds you can possibly imagine. But enough general crap. When I was growing up, I loved to go down to the local gaming store, buy magic cards, and gawk at the awesome miniatures they had for sale. And the games in huge boxes covered in brightly colored, gorgeous battle scenes, and I would regularly spend my allowance on White Dwarf magazine. I bought several of their games over the years, but I'm sure I actually spent more money on their glossy, awesome magazine, which was full of battle reports and pictures of expertly painted miniatures, whole armies or dioramas. The whole magazine was really just a giant advertisement for their new releases, but it was fan-friggin-tastic. It really fueled my imagination. And then my friends and I played Warhammer 40,000 from the old Rogue Trader book, like the original big, thick paperback thingy, with And we'd play huge, sprawling 3- or 4-way battles fought across entire rooms, which the game totally was not designed for. But we were young and liked launching missiles from one piece of furniture to the other. Of course, using the customization rules from that particular book had no semblance of balance, and we quickly degenerated into armies composed entirely of 10 toughness robotic Terminators armed only with heavy weapons. But I digress. I later bought Epic, the large-scale game for Warhammer 40k, where Space Marines are only 5 millimeters tall and giant robots rule, as well as Blood Bowl and Necromunda. Those last two were pretty awesome games, a little lighter on the initial customization, like they didn't have as much in the way of army lists. But they were designed for league play, where you would play matches with your team or gang, record the results and casualties, and your surviving force would carry forward to future battles, gaining experience and skills and hopefully some money as they went along. Those games are also smaller scale, and because of that smaller scale, you get a number of benefits, including the fact that you use far fewer miniatures, and in both games, pretty much all the miniatures have the same sized base. Actually, Blood Bowl has large players as well, but unlike most Games Workshop products, it's played on a grid, and even large players only occupy a single square, which means that I can use the same regular miniatures to represent them if I really want to. If you are super cheap, this figure means that you can just use any minis you have lying around, rather than buying into the miniature industrial complex and spending hundreds or thousands of dollars to field sexy, painted, correct figurines. Necromunda comes with 2 gangs, the Orlocks, who are a bunch of bland guys with Rambo headbands, and the Goliaths, hugely over-muscled bodybuilder types whose fashion sense is basically He-Man with a big mohawk. So, we'd decide that, okay, the Orlocks will be my House Delac gang, who are supposed to be skinheads in lightly colored trench coats, and the Goliaths, this time, will represent your Escher gang, the token all-female faction. My plastic figures were all unpainted, except some markings we used to track individual guys, and a couple who I modified to have heavy weapons. Because in these small-scale games, the figures are all individuals. Like our army list has names for all of them, and some will have gained skills over time. Others will have injuries that linger. It gets a little personal after a few matches. It's like, no, not Mikhail! He was this close to getting another shooting skill! So, growing up, my little sister and I used to play Blood Bowl and Necromunda. In the same way that gravity of a massive object warps the space around it, I had a significantly warping effect on my sister's childhood, because I'm like 7 years older than her. I had the advantages of being raised as an only child for 6.5 years, and then she had the advantage of being exposed to a lot of geek interests. She has her own interests now, and she's her own person, obviously, but you can tell there was an effect, and she is currently playing in an online D&D campaign. But at the time, and we're talking when she was something like 9 to 12 years old, younger than the recommended age on the packaging, we would take a game like Necromunda, which is designed for league play, and we would each build 3 or 4 gangs or teams or whatever, and then we would have battles between them, and then calculate our earnings and experience after each battle, and all the stuff you do in a real league or tournament. And obviously I'd help her as much as needed, including trying to help her avoid some mistakes or spot some missed opportunities during the game, but mostly let her make her own choices. And I had a lot of fun, because I didn't have a lot of other people to play with, and I felt like I was helping teach her analytical thinking. And she had fun and felt included by her way older sibling. Except that after a while she would inevitably get a little worn down, because I virtually always won almost every single game, especially Blood Bowl. And even when I was in trouble, I tended to pull it out of the fire somehow, which is extra demoralizing. Losing all the time sucks. But it's not like it was her fault. There's a huge difference in brain development and logic and experience between an 11-year-old and an 18-year-old. I should have found ways to handicap myself or something. So, Necromunda is a weird name, but really, it's like the smallest of the small-scale version of Warhammer 40k. almost the opposite of epic. It all takes place on one craphole colony in the Imperium, and in fact, it's smaller than that. It's only the decrepit, mutant-infested literal underworld of one hive city, the base of the pyramid that the modern livable part of the city is built on top of. You play as one of the many gangs of refugees, banished criminals, and other rejects from society. Where most of these games are played on a flat surface, except for a few die-hard fans who build their own custom 3D scenery, this game is notable because it comes with a whole box full of cool plastic bulkheads and printed cardboard floors and bridges to give you a whole bunch of multi-level ruined buildings to fight in, making vertical positioning and line of sight intrinsic to the tactics. And of course, these structures can be rearranged in a ton of different configurations to enhance your replay value, make every battle a little different. Now, in Warhammer 40,000, you play as high-tech advanced aliens, or the Zerg-like biological tyrannids, or the Space Marines who are genetically engineered super soldiers with the best powered armor and war machines that money can buy. Also, their Emperor makes Palpatine look like a red shirt. Or you could be orcs. In Necromunda, you can't even buy armor. There is armor that is so ineffective that in 40k it should barely be included on a soldier's stat block. That same crap armor is rare loot which is revered like a freaking magic item in the slums of the Underhive. Then there are weapons. In 40k, the laser gun is considered the baseline weapon. In practice, that means it's just about the worst weapon commonly seen on any battlefield. Their blasts mostly bounce off any decent body armor. That's why Space Marines and even most Space Orcs use bolters, which are kind of like 50 cal machine guns firing armor-penetrating high explosive rounds. And even those 100-pound hand cannons are still on the low end of the war-fighting spectrum. In Necromunda, where your gang members scrounge and fight over the very basic amenities of life, like edible fungus, you pay extra for laser guns because your other choice is autoguns, the 40k term for standard modern projectile weapons, like AK-47s, but way less reliable. In Games Workshop games, a natural 6 on your d6 to hit roll always succeeds. At least I think that's a universal rule. But whenever you roll a 6 to hit in Necromunda, you have to make an ammo check to see if your weapon jams, fails, or just plain runs out of ammo. Something a proper 40k army does not worry about. The two basic gun types are equally effective at killing, but reliable laser guns only fail the ammo roll on a 1, whereas autoguns have a 50% chance of failure, and if you spend a fortune to find yourself a genuine bolter rifle, you have notably better firepower, but your black market quality and poor maintenance means 1 ammo check and it's out of commission for the rest of the battle unless you can roll a natural 6. So there was this one game that I played from House Van Sar. Their models tend to wear black gear, almost like still suits from Dune, and beards. Or they would have if my Van Sars didn't look suspiciously like unpainted Orlocks. All the standard gangs in Necromunda are associated with one of the great houses from the better parts of the Hive City. Whether they enjoy some kind of illicit support, or maybe they're just a bunch of black sheep and outcasts from that house, but House Van Sar was known for manufacturing high-tech stuff. Technically, the gangs all have the same stats and gear options to begin with. They don't really have separate army lists, but they do specialize in different types of skills, so that as they gain experience, they actually differentiate from one another. And then the expansion added some very different gangs with their own rules, like the mutants, the religious psychos, and rules for spirers, who are basically rich kids from the 1% who entertain themselves by getting all the best armor and weapons money can buy and then playing like they're the Predator, hunting street gangs for sport. Anyway, I wanted my Van Sar gang to feel different from everyone else from the start, so I sacrificed some of my strength and numbers in order to buy expensive bolter rifles for all my guys, plus all the expensive flamers that I was allowed to buy. And then I got them all clip harnesses too, for the hell of it. Spending a few extra points per guy so that on any turn when they're on a building and don't move, they can just latch on to the building so they can't fall off when they get shot. Because falling off is bad. And they did really well, and eventually I had the maximum of 2 special weapons guys and got my leader a flamer as well. So I had a total of 3 flamethrowers roaming, ruling the ground in most battles. But the most famous member of the gang was this one guy, Igor. Like most, he had a bolter rifle, but for the 3 or 4 games I played this with him, he maintained one frightening and statistically unlikely pattern. Each battle, he would take his first shot, hit with a natural 6, succeed in wounding the target, which is a check of weapon strength versus the target's toughness. That's the part where bolters actually have an advantage. Then he'd roll another 6 for the injury roll, so the target is not just down, he's out of the battle. Do not pass go. And if I recall, most of his victims actually died in the post-game wrap-up, even though that's very uncommon. So his first shot every battle, he would put someone out of action with a large exploding armor-piercing round, but because the to-hit roll was always a natural 6, after the shot he had to make that ammo check for his unreliable death cannon, and as you might expect with a 1 in 6 chance, he always failed. Pretty soon other gangs would fear his name because he was the legendary sniper who only brought 1 bullet to every battle because that was enough. I hadn't bought him a backup weapon either. It would have felt like some kind of cop-out. So Igor would pick his spot, terminate someone, and then just walk away. Like, I called my do job, now hurry up and finish. It wasn't really enough, though, because the only person other than my sister who I played with a number of times was much, much worse. At least one of his guys, every turn, sometimes more, seemed to roll a 6-6-6. That's 6 to hit, 6 to wound, and then a third 6 to pass the ammo check for whatever weapon that guy was using. Losing all the time sucks, especially when I generally had better strategy and tactics, but couldn't overcome his tactic of rolling all 6s all the time. Anyway, Necromunda was a pretty cool game, though it was not as interesting in one-off battles. You really needed a league or tournament structure for your guys to advance. Blood Bowl similarly works best in league play, but it had a lot more to offer in one-off games, and very different, much less analog sort of gameplay that I enjoy even more. But I have a lot more to say about Blood Bowl. I think I'll cover that another time. Thanks for listening.